Henry VIII was once a powerful figure in England. He is known not only for his wives and the Church of England, but also for the dark shadow of his harsh rule. What history typically hides is the sad truth about his latter years, when a powerful king fell into a horrible decline, and his mind and body turned against him in brutal ways. He was no longer the dreaded monarch of Europe at the end of his life. Instead, he was a broken man who was called a walking corpse, a fading echo of the man who once ruled nations. The most stunning thing is how his body has changed. His waistline got so big that it was almost as tall as males his age, making him feel trapped in his own body. Henry could barely move because he was so heavy. He walked slowly and painfully, and every step reminded him of how weak he had become since he was young. He weighed almost 400 pounds at his heaviest, which was more than 3 times what most men of his time weighed. His presence was like a live testament to too much. But his deterioration wasn't just about how big he got. It spread deeper, hurting both the body and the mind, leaving behind a king who was stuck in horrible pain and rising instability. Henry's problems weren't just because he was overweight. His legs were covered with ulcers, which are wounds that won't heal and are full of decay that no treatment could fix. People reported the smell was so bad that it drifted across rooms long before he got there. Courtiers, who couldn't stand it, put scented rags to their faces in fear. Servants were afraid of having to wait on the king. They drew straws to choose who would have to dress his decaying wounds. It was a horrible job that was more punishment than duty, and it reminded them every day of how things were becoming worse. But his pain wasn't just in his body. Historians point to a terrible jousting mishap in 1536 that left Henry comatose for 2 hours. This was not a small fall. The head injury changed his mentality forever, taking away his youthful confidence and replacing it with paranoia, unexpected anger, and a constant suspicion of everyone around him. The accident was the turning point for the young king, who was once charming but became the dictator that history remembers as ruthless, frightening, and unpredictable. Henry's huge weight gain, bad temper, and ulcers on his legs may have been caused by Cushing's syndrome, a disease that modern scientists think he may have had. Sadly, no one had the courage to talk about his disease. It was treason to challenge the king's health, so doctors kept quiet about it, even though they could have been killed for it. It's scary to think about. A man who said he had the right to rule by God and was feared all over Europe couldn't even control his own body as it fell apart from sickness. Henry's servants took special chairs with them everywhere in his latter years. The king, who had formerly walked with power, could no longer walk without falling. His decline got worse. He lost control of his bowels, and attendants had to follow him around with cloths to mop up the mess. This was a ruler who was previously feared for his iron will. This was the same king who had killed people in fits of wrath. But now he was humiliated, a broken ruler stuck in the degradation of his own body. The last few years were a total breakdown, with both mind and body falling apart. But even though it was terrible, his court nonetheless bowed, acting like they were devoted to a dying king. His intellect broke down while his body rotted. The once confident and charismatic emperor became paranoid, suspicious, and unstable, leaving terror in his path at court. Fear of betrayal made every choice harder to make. His fears, which had been disguised under royal might, finally took over him and made his reign cruel and scary. The ladies in his life were at the center of this paranoia. Anne Boleyn, the queen who became his passion, was the most famous person in his novel. Anne Boleyn's execution is still one of the most famous events in history, and it wasn't done on a whim. It was part of a planned plot to thoroughly ruin her. People said she was cheating on her husband, having sex with her brother, and conspiring against the king. The evidence was fake, and people who were innocent were forced to confess via fear and torture. Henry made Anne's musician, who had once been her close friend, confess to an affair under threat. That lie sealed her fate. It was the last nail in her coffin. The cruelty grew worse as Anne witnessed 5 men, including her own brother, be killed on bogus claims of being intimate with her. She knew she would be next. Before she died, Henry's suffering reached its peak. He made her sign papers that ended their marriage, which meant she had to give up her queenship before going to the scaffold. Anne wasn't the last person Henry killed because he was paranoid. Catherine Howard, who was only a teenager, was caught up in a world of terror and harsh mistrust. When Henry found out about her past relationships, he got quite angry. He also made it treason to keep your marriage history secret from the king. Catherine's short reign became a nightmare. She was arrested for adultery within months, and her youth ended in sorrow as she waited to be executed. Henry wasn't usually mean right away. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, spent years alone, without a title, away from her daughter, and alone. No one read her love letters, and rumors of her insanity hurt her reputation. She lived her last years alone, having been left by the monarch she loved. Anne of Cleves had a different kind of pain. Henry said she was unattractive, so she had to accept to the annulment, as if her marriage and her title as queen had never happened. Anne signed the annulment papers because she was afraid of dying, and she even complimented Henry for being merciful. Forced thanks was the last insult, thrown away like an old piece of clothing. Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife, died after giving birth, but her death didn't stop him. Within days, Henry was looking for his next wife, burying his grief in ambition. Henry's quest for power and heirs continued on without a break after her death. Even when he lost, his need for control stayed strong, cold, and calculating. Life was a trap for his wives. If they tried to escape, they would die. If they rebelled, their families would be destroyed. If they stayed quiet, they would be stuck in Henry's paranoia and the system he dominated. The court itself got sick. Fear rippled across every hallway. If you looked at the king the wrong way or said something careless, you could be killed or ruined. Henry's court used to be a place for royal ceremonies, but it became into a prison of suspicion, where even his closest friends were scared and didn't know who would fall next. His habits changed as his body got weaker. His once noble hunger turned into disgusting greed, a ritual of excess that matched the corruption that was eating away at his spirit. During the later years of his reign, Henry's feasts were unreasonable. He ate enough food to supply whole villages, and his body fell apart as his hunger intensified. He ate whole hogs, flocks of chickens, piles of bread, endless fish, and enough wine to sink a boat. Each meal was a show of power and excess. Hundreds of meals were made every day behind the walls of his kitchens. But no amount of food could satisfy his hunger. It only made the terrible shadow of his dominion worse. Henry's feasts were not just for fun, they were also for control. Every bite said he had the right to eat as much as he wanted, a real example of how royalty can lead to excess. His body became bigger and bigger, much like his passion with greatness. The kingdom submitted to his will, with chefs working around the clock to feed their king's never-ending hunger. 47. It was more crazier that he thought food had magical properties. He thought that swan could give him grace, venison hunting expertise, and oysters strength in love. 48. Henry ate a lot of these things, thinking that being a king would protect him from harm. He was naive to how gluttony was hurting his body from the inside out. Meals became rituals of power. Henry was so scared of poison that he made his staff taste every dish, and then waited half an hour before he would touch the food himself. Eating became a show. Many people observed as the servants tried, waited, and bowed. Henry saw each feast as a chance to show off his power. Feasts lasted for hours. The courtiers could do nothing while Henry, who was fat and rotting, ate mountains of food. Every bite was not food, but a show of power. His table turned into a throne of authority. He outlawed simple foods like turnips and barley, not for health reasons, but because he thought they weren't fit for a king. He wouldn't stop eating, even if his body was getting bigger. His judges and physicians, who were scared, went along with his illusions because they couldn't face the damage he had done to himself. Henry was no longer the King of England in his latter years. He was a prisoner of his own desires. His meals, which used to be a sign of his authority, were proof of his collapse into too much. Henry converted his palaces into fortresses as paranoia took over. He had crossbows near his bed and daggers beneath his pillow. Sleep itself became a war zone. The guards stood watch all night, ready and armed, while the king couldn't sleep. Once, the King of England was respected. Now, he lived in fear. His palaces became twisted with paranoia, with secret tunnels, hidden doors, and ways to get away. For a monarch who thought death was coming for him, these were not luxuries but necessities. Henry thought that every courtier was a menace. Because of suspicion, his kingdom became a prison of fear, where trust was gone and even loyalty seemed like treachery. Henry's fear turned his kingdom into a place where people were always being watched. Spies followed courtiers, and other spies kept an eye on spies. No word or look was safe from being looked at. His daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, were always being watched. Henry thought they were not heirs but possible traitors, and he kept an eye on them like they were enemies in his own family. His habits changed as his body got weaker. His once noble hunger turned into disgusting greed, a ritual of excess that matched the corruption that was eating away at his spirit. This was more than just safety, it was power. Henry had to conquer every bite he took first. It was a paranoid display of dominance that looked like protection. He couldn't walk anymore by the end of his life. His decaying body created trails of rotten flesh as he was carried on a mechanized chair. Attendants were appalled and cleaned up the mess. The smell was so bad that even doctors ran away from his room. The once powerful King of England was now a walking corpse, a symbol of waste and destruction. Henry's body was too big for a casket when he died in 1547. Lead sheets were put around it, which didn't work to stop his disintegration. His body burst when the burial procession took him to Windsor. Gases blew the coffin apart, spilling his remains in a horrifying way in front of the throng. His body burst when the burial procession took him to Windsor. Gases blew the coffin apart, spilling his remains in a horrifying way in front of the throng. The smell stopped the march. Servants used rags to clean up the leaking flesh, while dogs licked up what had spilt out in the most disgusting way possible. The monarch who once governed England with unlimited power became a feast for scavengers once he died, unable to escape the decay that had taken over his existence. Even being buried didn't provide serenity. His tomb was dug especially wide, but the ground gave way beneath the weight of his coffin, so they had to try several times to put him in the ground. His tomb, which was meant to be a sign of authority, ended up being a symbol of confusion, just like the anarchy that had plagued his rule from the throne to the grave. After that, strange sounds and bad smells came from his grave. There were stories about a spirit that wouldn't rest, but science says that gases are still escaping. Henry's legacy was more than just his church and 6 marriages. It was a story of paranoia, greed, and obsession that took over his life and his realm. He killed his wives, scared his court with dread, and hurt his own body by eating too much. His rule was not one of creation, but of destruction on all levels.